Now, you might already have a tattoo, or maybe thinking of getting one, but I bet you haven't thought about how those tattoos could become high-tech biosensors that can tell you about your health. Well, my guest today spends a lot of time thinking about that and acting as his own experimental guinea pig to test out these biosensors. He takes us into the world of shape-shifting molecules and reprogrammable body art that could give our skin a whole new range of functions. This is the Discovery Arc podcast. I am Drew Douglin, and today, my friends, let us welcome Carson Bruns. Good place to start is just, how do tattoos work? I realize, I don't really know what it is. So, what is in the ink? How does it stay on the skin permanently?
Yeah, a tattoo ink has two main components. There's pigment, which is the material that gets permanently implanted in your skin and changes its color. And then there's a fluid, a carrier, a liquid that is really just there to make the pigment flow into your skin when it's coated on the tattoo needle. So a lot of tattoo inks have other components in them that maybe help the ink flow better into the skin, or perhaps even help with pain or swelling or things like that. But fundamentally, if you have those two things, if you've got a pigment and a liquid that carries the pigment, you can use that as a tattoo ink. And so the process of getting a tattoo is usually a needle gets dipped in that tattoo ink. And I say a needle, but in most cases, it's actually an array of needles. So there are single needle tattoos, but these are very uncommon. A normal tattoo needle has sort of a cluster of needles that are all tight together. And when you have a cluster of needles like that, they can sort of suck up the tattoo ink by what's called capillary forces. And it just allows the needle to kind of hold more ink. And then that needle, of course, gets kind of punctured through the top layer of the skin, which is called the epidermis. And when it goes through the epidermis, it can penetrate into the dermis, which is the second layer of skin. And you're essentially poking little holes in that layer in the dermis. And when you poke those little holes, the ink now has a little gap that it can flow into. So you repeat that process many, many times. A normal tattoo machine can cause those needles to go up and down 50, even 100 times a second. So the needle vibrates really, really quickly. You can make a lot of punctures in a short amount of time. And the ink just sort of flows into those puncture holes as you go. So more traditional methods of tattooing, before we had these more sophisticated tattoo machines that can do that sort of puncturing process really fast, were just same exact process, but just handheld tools. So you have to use your wrist and your hands to make those impressions on the skin.
Got it. And so that pigment just kind of gets locked in then at that second layer?
Yeah, so that ink comprising a pigment and a liquid flows into those tiny holes that you're puncturing in the dermis. And then the liquid kind of gets processed by your body. It sort of dissipates, and then the pigment gets left behind and it stays there in the dermis forever. When I first started researching tattoos, I thought that the pigments were just sort of freely suspended in the dermis, but that's actually not true. Most of the pigments get captured by these immune cells called macrophages, and they kind of spend their life inside of these cells that are really there to try and destroy them. Your cells recognize the pigments as a foreign material, and whenever your body finds foreign material in it, it sends immune cells to try and neutralize that. It sort of sees it as a threat. So a tattoo is actually kind of like a chronic inflammation, really. Your tattoo spends its whole life kind of in this battle with the immune cells that are trying to destroy it. But a good tattoo pigment is one that doesn't get destroyed by those immune cells, and that's kind of why it lasts forever. Those immune cells kind of swallow it up and try to kill it, but it resists, and so they just stay there kind of in this eternal battle. The best tattoo pigments win.
Wow. I never thought of that weird way that the immune system's kind of expressing the the tattoo. So how did you first get interested in all of this? Like, were you always fascinated by tattoos growing up, or what?
Yeah, growing up, I was really interested in both art and science, and even, I guess, philosophy and religion. I guess I had a lot of interests, as many of us do. But as I grew older, I really fell into science and started to see that as my probable career path. But I never let go of my interest in the arts. And when I was 19 years old, I got my first tattoo after this kind of meaningful trip overseas, and I wanted to commemorate the experience. And I really liked it. The tattoo was special to me, and they have a lot of people who have tattoos will tell you that there's an addictive quality, and that certainly happened to me. I um, Once I got my first one and I liked it, I wanted to get more, and so I sort of became this body art collector starting in my late teens, and I'm still going, still collecting.
So as you got more into research and I guess then PhD and postdoctoral work, did you start to merge the art and the science? Were you exploring sort of the chemistry of tattoos back then, or did that come later?
Yeah, so when I went to grad school, I decided to study chemistry, and I chose a branch of chemistry that I will label molecular machines right now, and we can get into what that means. But I had this advisor in my graduate studies who I was really drawn to because of the visual component of his research. He created these almost like cartoon like representations of these molecular machines that they made in his lab, and it was very visually appealing to me. And I thought, like, this is a lab and this is a mentor who kind of aligns with my interest in merging art and science. And so when I started, there was absolutely no connection to tattoos at all, but there was a connection to like the visual arts that I've kind of always been interested in mixing with the science.
Got it. So you mentioned those molecular machines. What are they, and what do they do, or what are the implications?
Yeah, it's funny. It's not easy to define what a molecular machine is because it's kind of controversial. Like the definition of a molecular machine is still argued about among experts in the field right now. And I happen to be on a sort of committee that's trying to solve this problem of how do we define a molecular machine. So I can't tell you definitively what it is, but I can tell you how I think of a molecular machine. And it's basically just a very, very tiny version of a machine, right? So then you ask, what is a machine? And I think a machine is a tool that's been designed by someone, or perhaps evolved, if you want, to perform some kind of task and at the expense of energy, right? So a machine is a tool that uses energy to accomplish a task that's useful to
Does
a
work.
human, for example. Yeah, it does work. Um, and so a molecular machine is a machine that's on the scale of a molecule or a small number of molecules. So same thing, it's a tool, it's designed to perform some kind of function. It needs energy to perform that function, but it's just extraordinarily tiny.
Gotcha. So I've heard you talk about smart tattoos. Would they fall into this category of a molecular machine?
Yeah, so that's kind of how I got into smart tattoos. I had this idea that we could embed molecular machinery into tattoo pigments and introduce new functions to the tattoo pigments that are conferred by the molecular machinery that you put in there. So an ordinary tattoo pigment just has a colorant. And I thought if you replace that colorant with a molecular machine, you could maybe do more than just kind of decorate the skin. You might be able to make tattoos that respond to different cues in the environment or in the body and give the person who has the tattoo some sort of hopefully useful information as a result of that machinery.
Yeah, I've seen you describe them as giving us potential superpowers, which I love. And what could be some of these powers? What could be some of the information they convey and the possible applications?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll give you the kind of holy grail of smart tattoos, which would be a tattoo that autonomously and continuously detects and reports your blood sugar levels. So, suppose you're a diabetic, for example, and you constantly need to monitor your blood sugar so that you can administer insulin as you need to stay balanced and conscious and healthy and everything. That's right now a pretty inconvenient process for diabetics. They typically have to draw blood in some way. Often there's a finger prick involved, and then you put a drop of blood in a machine that tells you your blood sugar levels so that you can decide if you need to inject insulin or not. There are more advanced systems that kind of uh, automate that a little bit more, but they still involve needles that are kind of permanently penetrating into your body, and it can become uncomfortable, and there's a lot of maintenance, and so it's pretty inconvenient to be a diabetic right now. And it would be really amazing if there was just a little mark on your skin somewhere that kind of turned on, for example, or lit up or something whenever you needed some insulin. So that was actually the first, I think, if you get into the history of smart tattoos, that was really the first use case that people were looking into. There was, in the late 90s, some researchers started thinking about, could we actually achieve something like this? Could we create a tattoo like mark on the skin that could somehow report blood sugar levels? And I think one of those papers is where the phrase smart tattoo was first coined. When I got into smart tattoos, when I started my lab here at CU Boulder in 2017, I wasn't really aware of any of that research. I had this idea to put molecular machines in a tattoo pigment and kind of see where it goes. And I wasn't even thinking about blood sugar at the time. So yeah, it's all connected. Um, my own research has focused more on external cues rather than internal cues. So it would be great to detect your blood sugar with a tattoo, and people are working on that. But there's a lot of problems with there's a lot of challenges fundamental scientific challenges that need to be overcome before we can actually do that. And my idea was to detect things outside of the body, like harmful radiation, for example, and it turns out that that's kind of easier to do than detecting some kind of biochemical problem inside of the body. So it worked pretty well on our first try. We created a smart tattoo that responds to ultraviolet light, and yeah, we were kind of off to the races from there.
And so, does it give off? Are we looking at like a color change here, or how? What's the kind of detection mechanism, I guess, to know if it would be picking up the right data?
Yeah, the very first smart tattoo that we made in my lab is like this invisible tattoo. It's kind of an invisible ink, but when it's exposed to enough ultraviolet or UV light, it turns blue. And so this kind of appearance of a blue color at the site of your smart tattoo is really kind of like a warning signal that you need to put on sunscreen. And then if you do put on sunscreen and you're still exposed to that UV light, the tattoo disappears, and it won't really reappear until your sunscreen wears off and you're still out in the sun. So it's kind of this nice autonomous signal that you need to wear sunscreen.
How do you test this stuff? It's like using real skin or models of skin or
Yeah, we kind of go through um, a series of tests that ramp up to ultimately testing it on myself. So usually we start with a kind of rubber skin, silicone model where it's literally rubber. We tattoo rubber basically. And if everything works well in the rubber model, then we tattoo pig skin. We literally go to the butcher and we buy skin from the butcher and we tattoo that. Pig skin is a great model for human skin. It's very similar anatomically. And then if we like how things are working in the pigskin model, we may um, do some toxicity tests just to make sure that uh, we're not too concerned about poisoning ourselves if we tattoo humans. And we don't always do that though, and I can explain why I don't get too nervous about tattooing myself. And then usually I tattoo myself. That's the best and most you know important to me test is when I give myself the tattoo and it works on me.
cool. You're not going through a series of undergraduate researchers then forcing them to put the tattoos on their skin.
No, I think we're building up to that. Someday we'll do a human study where we get to have human participants, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. There's a lot of approvals you have to go through, right? A lot of there's a board that reviews those types of experiments, and you have to make sure you're being responsible and minimizing the risk to the human participants. And there's actually kind of a loophole if you only have one participant, and especially if it's like myself as the principal investigator. I don't really have to go through those approvals, so it's kind of a lot easier to just test it on myself, and that feels ethical to me too. That if I'm going to be promoting the idea of giving yourself a tattoo that we made in our lab, I better be willing to get it myself first.
Which one did you have? The UV that you just described?
Yeah,
Or
that was the first smart tattoo I gave myself. Was that UV responsive tattoo that turns blue in the sunshine or when it's exposed to any kind of ultraviolet light. And that those tattoos have evolved a lot. We've kind of gone into body art and making reprogrammable body art that you can kind of turn on and off with different colors of light. And so over the years, I've probably given myself, I would imagine, over 100 tiny tattoos on my leg with these different kind of smart ink formulas.
yeah, so this would be the magic ink.
Yeah, Magic Ink is a sort of the brand of my startup company that I co-founded with one of my graduate students and uh, New York City-based tattoo artist named Bang Bang. And yeah, it's the world's first rewritable tattoo ink. So it's kind of like the UV responsive tattoo I described earlier. You can turn it on and off. It's invisible, but you can make it be visible. But what's special about Magic Ink and kind of different than the original smart tattoo we made is that once you turn it on, it can hold its color for a long time, hours or even days. So you don't have to hold a UV light over your tattoo to be able to keep seeing it. You just kind of switch it on with a light and then it stays on for a long time.
And when you say rewritable, can you then morph this into a different design with the
Yeah,
ink?
what's really cool about this is if you fill in a large area of your skin, imagine you made I don't know, a square that's 2 inches by 2 inches, and that square is completely filled with magic ink. Then we call it a photo mask. You could put like a stencil over that area and shine light through that mask or that stencil and like activate the color of the tattoo only through the stencil, right? Only in the shape of that stencil so that it really is rewritable. You can erase that and then change the design and activate it again. So it's this 2 inch by 2 inch area of your skin is now a smart tattoo it's not one tattoo, it's kind of infinity tattoos, right? It's you're only limited by the number of designs you can kind of print out and put on top of there as a stencil or a mask.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting you said about them being switched on and off because I was thinking that with the medical application type tattoos as well. It's like how long would these last compared to like a normal tattoo, right? Which you think of as permanent.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the medical aspect because that's really where we started, right? We wanted to make smart tattoos that would help people be more healthy. And I didn't realize until I was kind of already doing this work that doctors give patients tattoos in the clinic pretty often, especially dermatologists and radiologists. So, radiologists, in order to kind of maximize the efficiency of their machines that they have these really expensive machines that they use to dose patients with in their cancer therapy. And in order to make those machines really to maximize their use, they give their patients tattoos. It's almost like a target. They'll put little
Mm.
dots around the site they need to irradiate so that every time the patient comes back for a treatment, they know exactly where to point the radiation beam and they don't have to waste time kind of, aligning the beam over and over again. It saves a lot of time. Of course, those patients don't usually like the tattoos. Most often they get a permanent tattoo from their radiologist, and it becomes this permanent reminder of a traumatic experience, and many of them go on to try and get tattoo removal. And so when we learned about this, we realized that magic ink was like a great solution to this problem because your magic ink tattoo can be invisible all of the time if you want, and you only need to turn it on when you go to the doctor to get your treatment, right?
Yeah, that's so neat using that for applications where they already exist. You mentioned you weren't too worried about potential toxicity, and I was thinking of like if there would be issues around possible infections or allergies or other things. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think the best way to answer that question is to look back at just regular tattoo inks, right? So, um, a normal tattoo ink that you'll find in any tattoo artist's shop might contain any number of over 100 different pigments, and none of them have really been, vetted or investigated for their toxicity. The FDA here in the United States does not require pre-market approval for tattoo inks, which means that theoretically you could put any poison in a tattoo ink
Wow.
and sell it, and the FDA isn't going to prevent you from doing that. Of course, if it is really poisonous and it's causing problems, the FDA can step in later and tell you to pull it off the shelves. So, ink manufacturers are motivated to create safe inks that don't hurt people. But yeah, what's remarkable to me is that there's almost no research supporting the safety of any of the pigments that you'll find in a normal tattoo ink. But what we know is that, millions and millions of people get tattoos every year, and very, very few of them have significant complications. There's very few adverse events, and the adverse events that do exist are almost always some kind of infection that could be caused by contamination of the ink or unsterile practices by the tattoo artists. And so those are really easy to solve problems. There's very few cases where the pigment itself is causing some kind of toxicity, and even those cases are typically just an allergic reaction. So, worst case scenario, which is very rare, is you have a tattoo pigment that causes a non-life threatening allergic reaction. And I think the reason that tattoo pigments are so successful and so sort of safe to use, despite the lack of research on their toxicity, is that the dose of material you get in a tattoo is very, very low.
Hmm.
So the amount of pigment in like a square centimeter of a tattoo is about 1 milligram, which is a very, very tiny amount. If you think about like most drugs that people take, if you're gonna pop a Tylenol or an Advil or ibuprofen, something, the dose of that drug is going to be 100 times or more the amount of pigment you're going to get in your tattoo. So the dose is very low, first of all, and then the second thing is that the I'm going to use the word bioavailability is very low. And what I mean by bioavailability is um, the pigment, as we discussed, is this kind of, it's almost like brick dust, right? It's like this very insoluble material that doesn't really break down. Um, and so uh, it can't kind of diffuse around your body and through your blood and or your other fluids and kind of make its way into different types of cells and tissues because of this low bioavailability. So when you combine those two things, the very low dose and the very low bioavailability of a tattoo pigment, you wind up with safety, because what happens is you just put this pigment in your skin and it stays right there where you put it, and it doesn't really go around and mess things up.
Yeah, it's quite surprising. I mean, you talked about the eternal battle, I suppose, between the pigment and the immune cells that flood to the area. And I guess maybe I'm just surprised there aren't more systemic potential immune issues if that's such a long um, process over time of them engaging with the immune cells.
Yeah, the two things that you might worry about, um, I mean, that many researchers have worried about is the chance of causing some kind of disease or cancer to the skin, because obviously the pigment is there in your skin. And the other one is to the immune system because of those macrophages. And we know that those cells, those immune cells, the macrophages that are there to destroy the pigments, when they do win, or when the pigments are not so good, they do carry the pigment away from the tattoo site to the nearest lymph node. Lymph node is kind of a site in the body that's it's almost like a graveyard for foreign material. So it's what they're supposed to do, right? When these macrophages effectively think they've destroyed the pigment or whatever the foreign material is, they take it to the lymph node and kind of bury it there. So people have worried that tattoo pigments might cause some kind of lymphatic problems, lymphoma, for example, cancer of the lymph nodes. And very recently, some researchers have found a correlation between um, getting a tattoo and a higher incidence rate of lymphoma. So there
Mm,
may be a small risk there, actually, but we haven't established causation. So there could be many other reasons why a person getting a tattoo has a higher risk of getting lymphoma, right? People who get tattoos probably have a higher risk tolerance in general and are probably more likely to smoke, for example.
yeah,
Smoking definitely increases your risk of lymphoma. So it's not clear if the tattoos are actually causing um, increase incidence of lymphoma or any other cancer, but the jury's still out, I guess. But what they have um, really concluded at this point is that tattoos do not cause skin cancer. They've looked really, really hard, and there's just absolutely no way to correlate a tattoo with a higher probability of getting skin cancer.
gotcha. So when do you foresee these smart technologies becoming more mainstream, I guess, in medicine, or maybe consumer wearables first, and sort of what are the biggest challenges there?
Yeah, I think we'll see a very gradual progression of people's interest and awareness in smart tattoos. And you'll see it first in the body art world. As I mentioned, we're commercializing a smart tattoo that allows you to kind of rewrite or reprogram your body art. And I think as people become more aware and interested in doing that kind of thing, it'll kind of make its way into the clinic, and you'll probably start seeing radiologists and dermatologists using those types of inks instead of conventional tattoo inks for that purpose. And then I imagine that as we get more data on the safety of these materials, and by the way, I should have mentioned that even though I think pretty much all tattoo pigments are quite safe to use in general, we still try to make our smart tattoo pigments out of the safest and most bio-friendly materials possible, right? So we encapsulate our active ingredients in a polymer glass that's already used in many medical contexts. It's already implanted permanently in the body. And so it has this long kind of history of good compatibility with body and safety. So I guess I see, to answer your question about like when and where will we start to see smart tattoos, that's kind of the trajectory I see is like body art and then probably clinical tattoos where we're just replacing the existing inks that are already being used with these better inks. And then as that kind of goes on, hopefully more people will develop more of these smart tattoos that do really cool stuff like detecting blood sugar, for example, or blood alcohol content, or whatever types of things you want. And then by that time, I hope that we'll know more about kind of the biology of tattoos and how to make tattoos as safe as possible, that we'll be ready to start exploring some of these more kind of futuristic and exciting ideas.
Yeah. Gosh, yeah. I'm just thinking like there's definitely this big, I guess, preventative health push now, right, on getting blood work done, and that's becoming far more mainstream with different outlets springing up. And I don't know, just the idea of everyone having this ink patch that could be telling all these signs from the blood is just like such an interesting idea from a sort of population health perspective.
Yeah, it'd be really great. But, so somebody has to solve the challenge of, I mean, first of all, a tattoo pigment that's in your dermis, that second layer of your skin, is not really exposed to blood. Um, it's inside of these macrophages, right? So it's kind of inside of a fluid that's inside of a cell. And even that cell is not in the blood, it's in what they call the interstitial fluid. And interstitial fluid has a lot of the same stuff as blood in it. But again, it seems like you almost need to find a way to get your smart tattoo pigment or sensor or whatever you want to call it out of those immune cells so that it can actually detect the thing in the interstitial fluid that you want to detect, like blood sugar or alcohol or
Mm.
whatever. And so even if you can get that far, you're still not in the blood, and you got to be careful about detecting something that is in the interstitial fluid and the blood in equal proportions.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you know if the current continuous glucose monitors on the market that are via the needle, like you mentioned, are the tattoos that can read the glucose from the interstitial fluid as accurate and comparable to the CGMs?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in yeah, diabetes research, and I what I do know is that there are devices that detect sugar in the interstitial fluid rather than the blood, and they do a good job. So that's a good sign. You can use the interstitial fluid as a kind of proxy for blood, at least in the case of sugar. I'm not sure what other targets you can do that for. Like the one I think a lot about is blood alcohol, because it would be great if you have a tattoo that's like tells your friends you can't drive home from the bar or whatever. But yeah, there's lots of things you might want to detect: dehydration, um, drug overdose, hormone imbalance, right? And um, I think a lot of research is still needed to figure out which of those make sense to do with a tattoo and which ones you really just absolutely have to have blood to do that.
Yeah, totally. What's your next tattoo going to be?
um, I mean, I give myself a new magic ink tattoo almost once a week. So for
Well,
sure, my next smart tattoo will be a new color or a new formulation of magic ink. But, looking up a little bit further in the future, I'm really interested in developing tattoos that respond to things other than light, but that are still external, right? I think about some of these like e-paper displays where you can use like an electric or a magnetic stylus to write and erase and rewrite, right? It'd be great to have just kind of a magnetic or electric pen that you can kind of doodle on your skin with. That, yeah, almost like an etch a sketch or something. So we're really interested in exploring that kind of territory.
I see. Yeah, taking the temporary tattoos to a new level where you can just write and do your own.
Yeah, and you really can do that with Magic Ink too. Like we're actually designing a device we call the Magic Pen, which is a light that in the shape of a pin where you really can kind of do this doodling on your skin. But the light using light to turn the ink on and off has its limitations for body art because of sunshine, right? So if you're turning your tattoo on with a UV light and turning it off with a visible light, um, what's going to happen when you go out in the sunshine where the light is a mixture of UV light and visible light? And what happens in the case of Magic Ink is it the sunshine tends to turn the tattoo ink off within a few minutes usually, depending on how bright the sunshine is. And there might be plenty of use cases where you want to go outside and you want your tattoo to stay visible, right? And so that's where an electric or a magnetic kind of stimulus to switch the tattoo ink would be a lot more effective.
And so outside, maybe you're in line with the smart tattoos. Are there other things you're working on in the lab? I mean, I was reading about shape-shifting molecules and other kind of nanomaterials.
Yeah, kind of my goal when I started my lab was to find applications and new kind of use cases for molecular machinery. For many, many years, they've been kind of confined to the world of chemistry and really almost like a curiosity for a lot of chemists, but they haven't trickled their way too much into engineering and real like consumer products. And so I joined an engineering department as a chemist so that I could kind of try to position myself as this bridge between those two worlds and try to find ways to use molecular machinery to make useful stuff. And so, of course, the smart tattoos is one example of that. But another thing we do in my lab is we make these molecular machines that are like nanopulleys. So tiny little molecular pulleys. And when you make materials like soft materials, polymer materials, plastics, let's say, or rubbers, and you implement this pulley like nano machinery, you can introduce all of these really amazing mechanical properties to the material. So you can make it really, really strong, really stretchy. You can make it very difficult to like cut through the material because these nano pulleys like equalize tension. They kind of like redistribute the force when you try to deform or harm the plastic or the material. And so you get these kind of wonder materials that are super stretchy and super tough. And so we're working on those too. And we're even trying to make them out of really sustainable materials so that when you don't need it anymore, you can just throw it in the compost or even eat it. So we have this kind of like really environmentally friendly molecular machinery that we can put into materials to make these like sustainable plastics and rubbers and stuff that are like better than petroleum based plastics. They perform better, but they're much more eco-friendly, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, so many applications there in terms of building and construction, and then to be able to have that easy decommission on the back end.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think the trouble we're running up against, like the big challenge we're facing with these fancy materials is that it's most plastics, like let's say 99% or more of plastics come from petroleum, and petroleum is really, really cheap. So we can make materials that are much more sort of sustainable and environmentally friendly and even perform better than the petroleum based alternatives, but they're a lot more expensive. So that's the kind of challenge we have to solve.
Gotcha. Great. Well, when you're not building a new generation of tattoos and nanopulleys, what are some of your other personal interests outside of the lab?
Oh gosh, yeah, I have a lot. I make art myself, so I like to paint, and I tattoo for fun too. So even though I'm always testing these smart tattoos, I do some traditional tattooing as well. I kind of got into it because I knew that I needed to learn how to use a tattoo machine to do these experiments, but then I just had a lot of fun making body art, and so I've kind of gotten into giving myself just regular body art tattoos for fun as well. So yeah, I like to make things. I'm a dad, so I love hanging out with my little 3-year-old daughter, and I ride free skates. I'm really into like skating and snowboarding. Free skates are this kind of unusual emerging type of skate that's kind of a hybrid of a skateboard and inline rollerblades.
Oh wow.
And they're super fun. You do this kind of Michael Jackson shuffle to go sideways.
Oh yeah, is it where it's connected and you kind of like
Yeah,
feet
that's a
wiggle?
ripstick where they're connected. So if you imagine taking a ripstick and cutting it in half so they're not connected, and then you
Okay.
put 2 wheels on each side, that's a free skate. It's really fun.
Oh, wow. Yeah, is that your art up on the board there beside you?
Um, oh yeah, some of the art that I paint winds up in my office because I ran out of space at home. So the rejects come to my office to live. Yeah.
Love it. That's great. Yeah, I'll have to check out that free skate. Yeah. So are you like a snowboarder and skier as well?
Yeah, I am, of course, and I really wanted to get a job here at CU Boulder because it's just it's barely a half hour away from Eldora, which is a local ski resort, and I love in the winter to just go up there for a couple hours in the morning and then come down and do my work and do the experiments and write the papers and stuff. It's a great spot to be both a researcher and a snowboarder.
Yeah, it's a pretty good life. Cool. So I'll just give you my final wrap up question then that I love to throw at my guests, which is if you could give your one piece of advice or wisdom in the area of work, growth, productivity, health, relationships, anything, what do you think it would be and why?
That's a hard question, but a good one. And I think the best answer I can come up with for that is to like be yourself and love yourself, right? Or maybe I'll say it like that. You have to love yourself to be yourself. I think all of us are really unique. We all have a really unique set of gifts and um, interests, and it's important to really embrace your own spirit and express your unique and authentic self and not try to be somebody else who you admire. I think we do our best work and we be our best selves when we have that, when we're coming from that place of authenticity and self-love.
I love it. I love it. Where should people go if they want to keep up with the work of your company or your lab online?
Yeah, if you want to check out Magic Ink, we have a website at magic.ink, magic.ink. And if you want to check out my lab, we are called the Laboratory for Emergent Nanomaterials. That's a mouthful, but we have a website at emergentnanomaterials.com.
Perfect. I'll throw it in the show notes. Carson, really appreciate you coming on and speaking with me. I think this is such a fascinating area, both in terms of consumer, artistic endeavors and also the medical side of things. So I can't wait to keep following it.
Yeah, thank you
See
so
where it
much.
goes.
My pleasure. Thanks for
All right.
having me.
Cheers.